now. So everybody keep it clean. Um, so I was originally going to talk about the gun safety thing, the NRA in light of recent events. But after the election last night, it seemed appropriate to kind of regroup and take a look at what we learned. Um, Jeff, I'm just going to mute you real quick so we don't get any background noise in the recording. So you can unmute yourself when you have a question. So what did we learn from this election? And if you notice in the chat box there, I put up a link. If you haven't seen it yet, and for anybody that's watching the recording, the chat text will be saved with the recording, be posted on my website, so you can see the link. It's the Democratic Party of Wisconsin talking points after the election from last night. And one of the things that I want to point out is that in their talking points, the only one that is remotely about Rebecca Dallett is the first one, saying that she's going to be a fair and impartial Supreme Court justice and bring about independence to the state Supreme Court again. After that, all the other talking points are about Scott Walker, how this was bad for Scott Walker, how this was a referendum on Scott Walker, et cetera, et cetera. And this really gets to the point of Democrats in Wisconsin primarily are having a really hard time communicating what they're about. They talk about upholding Wisconsin values, but they don't say what those values are. They just go on and talk about Scott Walker this and Scott Walker that. And thus, I thought this would be a good time to regroup and look at, first of all, what we learned from this election. And it dovetails directly with up in SD10 and Patty Schachner's election up there recently, because it dovetails perfectly with what Patty Schachner did to win. And I actually pulled these kind of points here from a prior webinar I had done last year after the Trump election. And, what I thought we needed to do to win in 2018. And that is address outdated strategies that pass for conventional wisdom. And the idea is that facts are not persuasive or inspiring, that negative attack ads are not persuasive or inspiring, and candidates that just check off issue boxes are not persuasive and inspiring to people. And I think that with Rebecca Dallett's win yesterday, you can have a debate as to whether she was a more progressive candidate than her opponent in the primary, but she won the primary. She was the quote-unquote progressive candidate on the ballot. And when you look at her campaign, some things really stand out. So just to kind of double back a little bit and recap that all issues, no matter what they are, whether it's in a Supreme Court race or legislative race, everything you care about derives from your values and the frame. And obviously we've talked a lot about progressive frame is about caring for others, empathy, the idea that all politics are moral, and this provides a foundation for accepting facts that support your frame and your values. So even though facts are critically important, the frame provides the foundation for people to accept and understand your facts. Also, the idea that negative attack ads often help your opponent. They repeat the opponent's message, they reinforce the opponent's frame because you repeat their language. And again, it's not inspirational or motivational. So kind of just a quick recap of what we already know. The other thing that we already know is that a positive, hopeful vision message, when it's values-based, and on the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King's assassination, this is very prescient because what King did was entirely values-based. It inspired and motivated people. People responded because they believed what he believed, and it provides ideas and policies that support what you care about and your values. And obviously, what Martin Luther King Jr. accomplished is a clear illustration of that. So in essence, what authentic progressive candidates do well is they honestly and authentically execute the strategies that I just talked about. Even though they may not be doing them consciously, they do it because it's just who they are. Patty Shackner was a great example of that. She was not consciously aware of cognitive framing per se, but she did what she believed, and it reflected who she truly was as a person. And people will see what they value in these authentic candidates, and then they will vote morals and beliefs, not a laundry list of issues. And in order to bring together people who formally voted for Trump and formally voted for Walker, which is who Democrats need to reach in order to win statewide elections again, that's what needs to be done. And I would argue, going into our topic tonight, that what Rebecca Dallett did was she accomplished that in her primary message. And I had the opportunity to hear her speak in person on several occasions. And every time she did, it struck me that she focused a lot on this idea of what she experienced in court, the challenges that people faced every day, and how she put herself in people's shoes and could therefore identify with them, and therefore was better suited to protect people's rights and defend our values. And I have a few points that were pulled directly from her website and from campaign ads she did. And one of the things that she always talked about, and here we are, three men on this little discussion here, but I should point out that women are naturally more nurturing, they are more empathetic, and they are more authentically perceived as being authentically nurturant and empathetic with people. And she was always talking about this idea of looking out for others as how she was raised and how we, meaning she and her husband, are raising their daughters. And that in itself strongly evokes the nurturant parent values that the progressive frame is based on. And then she talked about protecting our rights and defending our values. And the reason that worked for her was because she strongly expressed what her values are or were during the course of the campaign. If you look at the DPW talking points I sent out to you or posted on the chat box there, you'll notice that they talk about Wisconsin values, but they don't say what they are. So what Dallett did and what Patty Shackner did was they both talked values, but they also not only walked the talk or walked the walk, but they also laid out what those values specifically are that they believe. So it's powerful then for her to talk about protecting rights and defending our values, because you understand what that means. And then again, here's an example of how she always talked about the challenges that people face every day, and how that was a big part of what she experienced in the court, and how she was able to put herself in other people's shoes and provide justice for all in a fair way based on those experiences. And again, that sends a powerful message because it's consistent with the values that she's talking about, right? So it's kind of a tiered system that's going on not only in our brains as we evoke these ideas, but people hearing them and then being motivated by them. And so this statement of being prepared to fight and represent our values on day one means something because we know what the values are. That stands in stark contrast to a lot of progressive candidates who they say the words progressive values or Wisconsin values, but then they never define them. They never define the frame. They never state what those values are. And that's critically important. And it's something that each time I saw her and each time I saw an ad for her, she evoked those ideas. And it's important to point out that even when she was running an ad going after her opponent, it was the idea that he doesn't represent those values. So that's critically important. The other thing is that what Dallett did successfully is, and I think that in spite of some of the media people focusing on how it was a very kind of a head-to-head election, that for the most part, her campaign stuck with their message. They did run some ads against Skowronek, but again, it was this idea that he doesn't represent our values and therefore is not qualified to defend our values on the bench. So that's more of an undermining tone as opposed to the actually kind of outright attack ads, which in what I saw from the campaign and researching Skowronek, or Skowronek, sorry, I keep mispronouncing his name, Skowronek. His campaign was largely focused on attacking Dallett, attacking her record of sentencing, right? That she was soft on criminals. They attacked her positions on important moral issues that she laid out based on her values, and things such as gun safety and other important moral issues of the day. They also attacked her empathy in dealing with people in her courtroom, which, in my mind, was probably Skowronek's biggest mistake of the campaign, because he was focused in great detail on this so-called thing, the rule of law, which is the metaphorical expression of the conservative model of direct causation and punishment for the undisciplined criminals. Direct causation being that there are bad people in the world and they're going to break the law, and when they do, we lock them up, we punish them. So that's a direct causation. Whereas when you go back, I'll go back to the previous slide here, when you look at Dallett's description of the challenges our neighbors face every day, she talks about moms working 2 jobs, not being able to ends meet, families losing their home when medical bills stack up, victims of violent crime in poor neighborhoods, victims to guns, drugs, and gangs devastating their community, people trying to get their lives on track, but stuck in a criminal justice system, right? All those things. Did he say she was too empathetic? Oh, good question, Mark. What he said was he was attacking the empathy she had for people whose lives aren't so good, right? So part of that whole soft on crime thing is the idea that he's attacking the fact that she has empathy, as she's describing in this paragraph here. So yeah, good question. He didn't directly say she's too empathetic, but he attacked the ideas that she evoked through her empathy of being able to walk in other people's shoes with the systemic problems they bring into the courtroom. So basically, when Skowronek attacked those things, and he evokes this idea of the rule of law, what he did was he caused people's empathy to be more active. And so what we know is, there's a couple of things we know. So people want and need hope and empathy, right? So as human beings, we evolved to empathize with other people. It's what makes us successful evolutionarily as a species, because we can empathize with and work together to solve big problems that we couldn't do individually. Unlike other species of animals, mammals, that are more self-reliant, although most mammals are able to cooperate in groups. So We evolved for empathy, so people want and need that. People also want and need hope. So one of the things that we're seeing is that Trump is driving people away from authoritarian ideas and thought. Why is that? Because he is so extreme in his authoritarian ideas and thought. They largely violate people's core empathy that most people have. So that is driving people away from authoritarian ideas. And the idea of a caring future that provides a better vision for the future for people really is inspiring. So a negative message attacking empathy and evoking a fear of loss without authoritarian ideas, oh, and pardon my typo there, it drives people away. So the fear to over, well, and yeah, Mark, to your point, I think that that really ramping up the fear is going to tend to drive more people away from authoritarian ideas. And I saw that he said something about we need a major event to bring the country together. And obviously what he's telegraphing there is right, to your point, that we're at a time when acting more and more in the authoritarian way is going to drive people away from that because of the majority of the population having a need for empathy and having a need for hope. And as long as there are people in political discourse who are willing to forward that vision and keep it going in a resounding fashion, it will drive people away from those authoritarian ideas. So the idea of a positive progressive vision that is communicated well is critically more important now than when things are just kind of plugging along and you see parties working together. As things have become more divisive, those empathetic ideas are even more important, especially in the political arena. So, Jeff, that's a great question. Putin being the example of authoritarian success story. I guess in terms of the way he has consolidated power for himself in Russia, I would say yes. But I think whether he is actually a success remains to be seen, and you would have to ask the people of Russia whether whether they consider him a success, and how you define success. Is success him just having power, total power? Then yes, he would be a success story. But historically, that is not sustainable. It's not a sustainable model for a prosperous nation, as we've seen. And history will have to be the judge of whether that is successful. And one of the most tyrants wind up with a revolution, or they wind up with a revolution from within that maybe is not felt nationally, but within their own system. And obviously, Trump could be an example of a revolution within the system that could be a peaceful revolution of sort. I would hope that would be the case. And one of the things that was stunning about last night, and I think this underscores, as much as the Democratic Party wants to use this against Scott Walker, they would be better served in trumpeting what this means for empathy and progressive values and what that actually means, because it carried into the treasurers the question of whether or not to eliminate the treasurer position as a constitutional office, because people understood that was a elected position that could protect people's not only investment in the state, but also public lands. So what was interesting was, as a result, this is map from the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel's analysis of who won in what counties, but I would encourage you to look in a few places that Trump won in just less than 2 years ago. And it's the corridor along the Mississippi, along western Wisconsin, was all Trump. Now, Trempealeau County, just southwest of Eau Claire there, did go for Skrenak. However, most of the other counties along the Mississippi went for Dallett. And that is a reversal from when they voted for Trump in 2018. The other place that was critically important was in Brown County. And in Brown County went for, sand mines in Trempealeau, right. Yeah. And unfortunately, Trempealeau County still went for Skrenak, which that county tends to go back and forth. But Brown County, which is also went for Trump, went for Dallett. So really interesting, some interesting changes there that scored a solid victory for progressives. And in fact, I have to go back and check, but I believe that some of the counties west of Eau Claire, St. Croix, et cetera, also went for Trump. Yeah, that's a good question, Jeff. It's technically a nonpartisan race, obviously, but I think most analysts agree that in Wisconsin over the last, and especially the last 8 years, Supreme Court races have become overtly politicized, and there's no separation between partisan and nonpartisan in terms of the spring nonpartisan elections for Supreme Court justice. And largely it has to do with the spending that goes on from the third-party groups on both sides, labor and the manufacturers and commerce on the right, and then labor on the left. A lot of money from highly partisan organizations going to each candidate. And I would say that even in the language of the conservative candidates are largely politicized, as are the liberal Democrat progressive candidates as well. So I think there is a correlation. I think this is really, really bad news for the fall for Republicans. If Democrats have candidates or a candidate that focus on these positive progressive things, as opposed to that it's all about beating Scott Walker, because obviously progressives have a lot of really great ideas that correlate to their values to communicate to people, that give people something to go to the polls for, as opposed to just saying we're not that person. So I'll have this up on my website tomorrow. Feel free to use it as you like. The one thing I'm going to go back to this one slide here, is this idea of authentic progressive candidates. I think is critically important. Rebecca Dallett was not faking anything. Patty Schachner was not faking anything. They authentically, honestly believed what they were saying. It's who they were. And that is even more important than having a good script. So I get, with that, it's just the three of us. I know the date change threw some people off, but I'll open up, open it up if you guys have any comments or. Oh, sorry, Mark, I just saw your question. Oh, yeah, I know exactly what it is because I've been in the room with them previously. Look, they have focus groups that they run these things by, number one, but also they raise more money when they send out emails and press releases that attack Scott Walker, right? So that's what they're basing it. Now, granted, and I've really pushed them on this, they've never sent out positive emails. They right? They've never said, wow, Rebecca Dallett won, and these are all the things that she believes, and these are her values. Yeah, right. So that's a spot on comment. The money from the hardcore Dems, right? So they send out these emails that attack Scott Walker, and all the usual people send money. So they say, "Ooh, we got all these money, all this money," but they never send out the positive emails that say, here's what Rebecca Dallett believed, here's why she won, here's what people were voting for, and we need your contribution so we can support more candidates like that, so we can. They don't do that, and they never have. And it's this cycle, right? They have no data to show that it works, so they don't do it. But then they never get the data to show it works, so they keep doing what they're doing. And it's almost like they keep trying to squeeze it tighter and tighter and tighter, so they keep concentrating who their audience is. And the problem with that is that the party's missing an opportunity. I'm hoping that there are candidates that just do what's right and say to the party, okay, you're going to do what you do, but we're going to do what we do, and we're going to win in spite of what you're doing. And I think that's kind of what's more important here. So, yeah.
I think Mike has this going for him. He's campaigning full time. And I don't know which other ones are, but just for the sake of a demonstration of how I work, in my village, a lady came to my door who's running for office, and she said, "Hi, I'm running," and I recognized her from the last time she ran 4 years ago. I invited her in, we talked, and I voted for her. There was a human contact. It was not her message. It's that she cared enough to come and ask me what I thought, and what I think may never come up for her to vote. But she knows me. Mm-hmm. She took the time to listen. So it's not what she said. It was her bearing. It wasn't a dogma, and it wasn't anything. It's just that she didn't say, I share your values. She came to my house and said, what are you about? And that to me overcame whatever jerk she may be in office.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you raise a good point, Jeff, because it's why Bernie Sanders caught fire more than he even anticipated that he would from the beginning, right? I mean, initially, the Sanders campaign never dreamed of what their campaign would amount to, but it just caught fire. And the reason is what you're saying is that this is critically important, is that the personal contact with people from the campaign and from people who, like you, act as surrogates for the campaign because you share the same beliefs is far more important than anything you can say in a press release or any kind of written message you can put out there, because it's that unconscious connection you have with people where, again, you don't have to even say what your values are. You just know it from having contact with that person and having that connection. And I think you're right. I think that's an advantage that Mike has. I honestly believe that Kathleen Weinhaut shares the same kind of infectious connection with people. Beyond those two, there aren't others in the race that do. And I've met all of them. I've seen them all several times, both in person and, so. Oh yeah, Mark, you should be able to unmute yourself. But yeah, there you go. Yeah, I hope that answers your question, Jeff. But I think that was a great observation. The personal contact from the candidate and people who act on their behalf is more important than anything else you can do. So.
Scott?
Yep, you're there.
Okay, thank you. Have you heard anything more from the Baldwin campaign? I sent you that email a couple weeks ago when I was at the state chair, and their motto for the campaign is going to be Wisconsin first.
Yeah,
The whole Trump first thing.
Yeah.
I talked to that campaign guy. I can't remember his name.
Scott Spector. Yes.
It was like I was talking to an ashtray. I mean, it was just unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really disappointing. I sent, so I know Scott Spector a little bit, so I sent him an email. And I know Dane Verisi really well, who works for Mark Pocan. And I said, do you know, because I know Dane really well. And I said, do you know anybody in Tammy's campaign that, we could maybe have a sit down with? Because I said, if this is going to be their campaign ad, it's going to be a disaster. Because first of all, here's the problem is that, so if with Tammy running on a Wisconsin first frame, which is obviously heavily conservative because Donald Trump used it. And then you have a Democrat who's more progressive that say they have a really good progressive message. It's her message is going to completely undermine that progressive candidate.
Right.
It'll have a systemic effect, and it'll dilute the progressive message. It will, in some cases, it might negate it. So I don't know. I'm guessing they did a bunch of focus groups with it. They polled it. It polled well. Obviously, it's going to poll well because it's the frame, the dominant frame, the one that most people adhere to. It's the one that most people believe, and they're going to be like, yeah, Wisconsin first, rah, but yeah, and the problem is that whether she win or loses, it hurts progressive ideas.
Hurts everybody down ticket. The other one I'm really concerned about is Vinehout with the letter that she wrote in the character reference for the child, the guy who had the child pornography.
Oh yeah.
And if God forbid she won the primary, I just know what I would do as a Republican. I'd stay mum on that issue until about, 8 days before the election. Yeah. And then I'd have a solid wall of pedophile Democratic ads.
Yeah.
And I could take down the whole ticket.
Yeah. Well, not only that, but then, her voting no on the waiting period.
Right.
That would be one that they would jump on as well. So,
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's that inconsistency of, when you start having issues being, what you check off, and then you call yourself a Democrat, then you're not consistent on your values. And so it creates a lot of problems.
Well, the problem that I see, and I've always been afraid of for Mike, is how does Mike avoid becoming just a mindless mouth of progressiveness instead of the genuine guy that he is when he has to worry about the words that he chooses, and they get in the way of his vision, his personal vision.
Yeah, no, I've never, I've talked to Mike a lot about this, and with very few exceptions, he doesn't have to worry so much about the words he says, much like Bernie, because he's so authentic. It's not really, if he stumbles on a word and it's, it's more of the context in which those words are used. And in Mike's context, it's very much, you know that he's coming from authentic progressive point of view. His frame is very empathetic. It's all about people, and so I've told Mike this a lot. I've never worried so much with him about a word here and there. It's more important that he remain true to his principles, and that people who go out on his behalf remain true to those same principles, and that we come up with ways to tell stories that evoke the idea of caring for others and community, and how we all do better when we all do better. That's far more important than worrying about a word here and there. So yeah, and we'll talk, and just looking ahead to the next webinar for Mike's campaign, we're going to talk about that a lot, because I think people are wanting to do more. They want to do more letter writing, more social media, do more, and we'll get into that in detail. So yeah.
I've again in Shorewood, there's a little machine that writes ad nauseum, and it's constant, and it has a negative impact, even though they're all on the same page. When it happens so much, it's not real.
Mm-hmm.
And there needs to, I think it would be beneficial to have a sense of pace of the material that gets mailed, and not, because you turn off the publications as well.
Yeah.
When we overdo it. And I don't know how to address that. It's just an observation that I've had.
Yeah. And just a side, I don't want to get too in the weeds on campaign stuff, because a lot of people are going to watch this that are not related to the campaign. So if you want to send me an email, Jeff, or if you want to talk on the phone in more detail, we can do that. But yeah. So, all right. Thanks, gentlemen.
All right, thank you.
You bet. I'll be seeing you all on the street.
All right, thank you.
All right, cheers.